Hello, welcome to Guide London. My name's Nick Salmond. I'm a Blue Badge London tourist guide. I'm one of around 600 members of the Association of Professional Tourist Guides. That's the people who run the Guide London website. Now, if you've been able to join us over the last few weeks, you'll know we've been broadcasting here on a Monday, a Wednesday and a Friday, trying to bring a little bit of London to you wherever you are in the world. Over the last few weeks, we've covered all kinds of subjects from history to literature and looked at some of the great buildings here in our capital city. If you were able to join us on Monday, you would have heard a talk about the British Library, one of our great cultural institutions. Well, today we're going to talk about one man, perhaps one of the most famous Britons to ever live. That is Sir Winston Churchill, regarded by many as our greatest Prime Minister. He led the country through the Second World War. If you were able to join us a month ago on the 8th of May, you would have had a special hour-long programme marking the 75th anniversary of VE Day, Victory in Europe Day, the end of the Second World War in Europe. That broadcast is still online. It's on our YouTube channel, along with all our broadcasts. So if you've missed any of them, just go to YouTube and search for Guide London. You can find all our broadcasts there. It's definitely worth catching up with, but not until you've watched today's programme, of course, because today we're talking about Winston Churchill with London Blue Badge tourist guide Tim Hudson. Tim is going to take us right through Churchill's life from his birth in the 19th century up until his death in 1965. He's going to look at some of his achievements, some of the things that didn't go quite so well. And he's also going to tell us about some of the buildings associated with Winston Churchill, some of the places you can go to in London to see where the great man worked, where he lived. We are broadcasting live, so we're happy to answer any questions. All you have to do is type them in the comments field on Facebook or Twitter or on YouTube, and we'll try and pick up the questions and answer them at the end of the broadcast. But without more ado, I'm going to hand over to Tim to tell us all about Sir Winston Churchill. Tim.
In 2002, the BBC presented a nationwide TV poll to find the 100 greatest Britons in history. It ran for several weeks and resulted in some surprising nominees, among them occultist Aleister Crowley, gunpowder conspirator Guy Fawkes, and punk rocker Johnny Rotten. The much maligned monarch Richard III came in at 82. Finally, the list of luminaries was whittled down to just 10, with celebrities endorsing their particular candidates, fighting off strong competition from William Shakespeare, Isaac Newton, Princess Diana, John Lennon, and despite the vigorous campaigning of students from Brunel University, named after the illustrious engineer of God's wonderful railway and other great achievements, it was Sir Winston Churchill who emerged victorious. My name is Tim Hudson, a London and Heart of England Blue Badge guide, and I want to explore some of the reasons behind Churchill's claim to greatness and some of the places around the country associated with him. As an actor too, I want to examine some of the facets of this extraordinary, larger-than-life character. Soldier, statesman, orator, historian, author, painter, bricklayer, cigar smoker and bon viveur, family man, racehorse owner, and animal lover, some of the many roles he assumed. He was a man of many parts, all played to the hilt, and it is with no false modesty that Churchill declared, "We are all worms, but I do believe that I am a glowworm." Just over 80 years ago, on the 10th of May 1940, a time of desperate peril for this country, Winston Churchill was appointed Prime Minister. Later he would write, "I felt as if I were walking with destiny, and that all my past life had been but a preparation for this hour and for this trial." Churchill's journey had begun on the 30th of November 1874 at Blenheim Palace, the ancestral home of the Dukes of Marlborough, to whom he was related, his American-born mother Jenny Jerome having married Randolph Churchill, the third son of the 7th Duke. The first holder of the title was John Churchill, one of the most illustrious soldiers in British history, and the splendid Baroque palace was bestowed on him by a grateful nation following his most famous victory against the French at Blindheim on the river Danube, anglicised to Blenheim, in August 1704. The young Winston would reenact his famous ancestors' military prowess using lead soldiers, some of which can be seen at Blenheim Palace today. Later, he would write a notable biography of the first Duke of Marlborough, and would soon embark on a military career himself, displaying a dash and pluck of which his celebrated ancestor would have been proud. A frequent visitor to Blenheim, where he would propose to his future wife in the Temple of Diana, Churchill observed, "At Blenheim I took two important decisions, to be born and to marry. I am content with the decision I took on both occasions." The palace was designed by the architect Sir John Vanbrugh, best known for his plays. Winston imbibed some of the theatricality of his birthplace in his personal style, while his life would mirror its heroic scale. His parents were both busy socialites, and his father a rising star in politics, so parental affection was provided by Churchill's nanny, Mrs. Elizabeth Ann Everest, whom Winston nicknamed Old Womb, and to whom he remained close until she died when he was 20. He was not a brilliant scholar at Harrow School, to which he went in April 1888. The punishment book kept by the school records that on one occasion Winston received 7 lashes for breaking into premises and doing damage. Determined to pursue a military career, Churchill took the entry exam for the Royal Military Academy at Sandhurst 3 times before passing. He applied for the cavalry so that he wouldn't be required to do maths. On the 2nd of February 1895, he was commissioned into the 4th Queen's Own Hussars. Winston's attempts to win his father's approval were curtailed by the latter's untimely death on 24th of January 1895, aged just 45. The event convinced Winston that he too would die an early death, which seemed to fuel his relentless energy. Always living beyond his means, Churchill supplemented his income by acting as a war correspondent, in which capacity he travelled to Cuba to write for the Daily Graphic about a local insurrection against the Spanish. It was there that he acquired his taste for cigars, which were his lifelong passion. "Never trust a man who has not a single redeeming vice," he once said. In 1896, Churchill's thirst for action led him to Bombay, where he excelled at polo, and subsequently to Malakand on the northwest frontier, where he took part in an expedition to suppress a fierce Pashtun tribe and witnessed violent death at close quarters. A subsequent campaign in the Sudan saw him participate in one of the last significant charges of the British Army using cavalry at the Battle of Omdurman. Winston's genius for self-publicity was soon manifest, writing up glowing accounts of his involvement in these martial exploits. Arguably, Churchill was at his most swashbuckling in South Africa, covering the Second Boer War for the Morning Post. He accompanied an armoured train leading to his capture and imprisonment in a POW camp in Pretoria. He subsequently escaped with a £25 bounty on his head to help relieve Ladysmith and capture Pretoria personally, receiving the surrender of 52 Boers. He returned to England to find himself something of a national hero for a public which eagerly devoured his own accounts of his adventures, very much in the tradition of Boy's Own or G.A. Henty. And on the back of this success, Churchill embarked on a career in politics. Elected Conservative MP for Oldham in 1900, Churchill later became a supporter of social reform and joined the Liberal Party. In 1908, he was promoted by the Prime Minister H.H. Asquith to be President of the Board of Trade. But that same year, a transformative event occurred when Winston met Clementine Hozier. It was the beginning of a lifelong romance. She was her husband's best friend, but firmest critic when his ill temper occasionally got the better of him. Thousands of their letters survive, hers signed with the picture of a cat, his with a pig. And there is a particular letter in the Churchill Museum which is very revealing about their relationship. Clemmy warns her husband about his rough, sarcastic, and overbearing manner and confesses she has noticed a deterioration in him. You won't get the best results by irascibility and rudeness, she warns him. "I married and lived happily ever after," Churchill wrote of their wedding in September 1808 at St. Margaret's Church, Westminster. Together they had 5 children: Diana, Randolph, Sarah, Marigold, and Mary. Clemmy outlived Winston by 12 years, having been ennobled in her own right for her war work. Churchill's relations with other women, however, could be more complicated. He was no great supporter of the suffragette movement, once remarking, "Nothing would induce me to vote for giving women the franchise. I am not going to be henpecked into a question of such importance." His sallies with American-born Nancy Astor were legendary. "If I were your wife, I would put poison in your coffee," she said, which earned the reply, "Nancy, if I were your husband, I would drink it." On another occasion, he sparred with the pugnacious Labour MP Bessie Braddock, who accused Churchill of being drunk, to which he responded, "And you, madam, are ugly, but I shall be sober tomorrow." To some women, however, he could be unfailingly gallant. At a reception in Richmond, Virginia, he asked his hostess if he could be served chicken breast and received the reply, "Oh, no, we Southern ladies use the term white meat." The following day, his hostess received a corsage bearing the words, "I would be much obliged if you would pin this on your white meat." Churchill's ministerial career continued apace, and he was responsible as Home Secretary for introducing some radical social reforms, including helping to draft the National Insurance Act of 1911. A move to the Admiralty in October gave Churchill the opportunity to innovate. He promoted the construction of newer, larger warships using oil rather than coal, and also pioneered naval aviation, undertaking flying lessons himself in the style of Mr. Toad. He focused his enthusiasm for technology by championing the development of tanks. When the First World War broke out, however, Churchill was a member of the War Council, and in 1915, one of the political and military architects of the ill-fated attack on Constantinople via the Dardanelles in the Allied landings at Gallipoli, which were repulsed with huge losses. In a manner which would be inconceivable today, Churchill assumed personal accountability for the fiasco. He resigned from government and atoned for his role in the disaster by rejoining the British Army. Appointed Lieutenant Colonel of the 6th Battalion Royal Scots Fusiliers on the 1st of January 1916, he led his men with reckless courage, making 36 forays into no man's land. It was following the failure of the Gallipoli landings that Churchill discovered the therapeutic benefits of painting. The trauma he experienced had resulted in recurring bouts of depression, his notorious black dog, which were countered by the equanimity he derived from his palette and easel. It was his sister-in-law Goonie who first encouraged Churchill to paint, and in his treatise Painting as a Pastime, Churchill says of his hobby, "Happy are the painters, for they shall not be lonely. Light and colour, peace and hope will keep him company to the end, or almost to the end of the day." Painting in oil on canvas, Churchill submitted 3 paintings to the Royal Academy Summer Exhibition in 1947 under the name David Winter. Subsequently, under his own name, he was elected Honorary Academician Extraordinary. The Churchill Museum has some of his work on display, but more can be seen in his studio at Chartwell. Returning to politics in March 1917, Churchill served as Minister for Munitions, in charge of boys' toys, supplying tanks, aeroplanes, guns, and shells. Subsequently, he served as Secretary of State for War and for the Colonies, before crossing the floor of the House to sit first as an independent and then as a Conservative again. "Anyone can rat," he said, "but it takes a certain ingenuity to re-rat." He served as Chancellor of the Exchequer for 5 years under Stanley Baldwin, but following the Conservative defeat in 1929, Churchill fell out of favour with the party leadership and for the next 10 years did not hold office. Churchill's relentless drive got him through the so-called wilderness years. Innumerable newspaper articles flowed through his pen, warning in particular about the dangers of German rearmament and the need to rebuild Britain's fighting capability. He received privileged information about the state of Germany's preparations and became a fierce critic of the policy of appeasement of Hitler's territorial demands adopted by the new Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, remarking, "An appeaser is one who feeds a crocodile, hoping it will eat him last. Churchill bluntly and prophetically accused Chamberlain's government of being given the choice between war and dishonour. You chose dishonour, and you will have war. When war was declared on the 3rd of September 1939, Churchill was brought back into government as First Lord of the Admiralty. But when the German army overran Norway in April 1940, a major debate took place in the House of Commons on the government's conduct of the war. Even though Chamberlain won the vote of confidence, a number of his fellow Conservatives rebelled and many more abstained, forcing his resignation. When the Labour opposition refused to back Foreign Secretary Lord Halifax to replace him, on the 10th of May 1940, the King reluctantly asked Churchill to form an administration, which would be a national government formed of Conservative ministers and leading Labour Party MPs in key positions. It was Churchill's defining moment, and one which called forth one of his most famous speeches. I would say to the House, as I said to those who have joined this government, I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat. We have before us an ordeal of the most grievous kind. We have before us many, many long months of struggle and of suffering. You ask, what is our policy? I can say it is to wage war by sea, land, and air with all our might and with all the strength that God can give us, to wage war against a monstrous tyranny never surpassed in the dark and lamentable catalogue of human crime. That is our policy. You ask, what is our aim? I can answer in one word: victory. Victory at all costs. Victory in spite of all terror. Victory, however long and hard the road may be, for without victory, there is no survival. Almost immediately, Churchill had to contend with impending disaster. The rapid German advance through France had cut off the British expeditionary force at Dunkirk. Arguing passionately for no surrender, in the face of overwhelming odds, Churchill persuaded his cabinet to continue the struggle against the menace of tyranny. A miracle of deliverance ensued. 80 years ago today, the last of the 338,226 Allied troops was evacuated from Dunkirk after the heroic actions of the fleet of little ships. The following day, 4th of June 1940, Churchill returned to the Commons to make perhaps his most celebrated speech. We shall go on to the end. We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight on the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. It was Edward R. Murrow, the US broadcaster, who first observed that Winston Churchill mobilized the English language and ascended into battle. On 18th of June, Churchill went on to warn, the Battle of Britain is about to begin. Let us therefore brace ourselves to our duties, and so bear ourselves that if the British Empire and its Commonwealth last for 1,000 years, men will still say this was their finest hour. Churchill himself was careful to acknowledge the resilience of the British people under fire and their long patience in the face of adversity. It was the nation and the race dwelling all around the globe that had the lion's heart. I had the luck to be called upon to give the roar. All of the qualities that made Churchill a difficult individual to deal with, his irascibility, his self-centeredness, his obstinacy, self-will, determination, and sense of history were exactly what was required in 1940. Cometh the hour, cometh the man. In the summer of 1940, Hitler was preparing to launch Operation Sea Lion, the invasion of Britain, the success of which depended on the German Luftwaffe achieving aerial supremacy over the Royal Air Force. This was not achieved, owing to the heroism and skill of the young RAF pilots, prompting Churchill to declare, "Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few." From September 1940, Hitler intensified his bombing of London and the other major cities of Britain. Churchill was constantly to be seen visiting bomb sites, encouraging civilians, and in his speeches he galvanized resistance and inspired defiance of the enemy during the Blitz. Of Hitler he said, "This wicked man, the repository and embodiment of many forms of soul-destroying hatred, has now resolved to try and break our famous island race by a process of indiscriminate slaughter and destruction. What he has done is to kindle a fire in British hearts, here and all over the world, which will grow long after all traces of the conflagration he has caused in London have been removed. He has lighted a fire which will burn with a steady and consuming flame until the last vestiges of Nazi tyranny have been burnt out of Europe, and until the old world and the new can join hands to rebuild the temples of man's freedom and man's honor upon foundations which will not soon or easily be overthrown." The reference here to the old world and the new is an indirect appeal to the US to join the struggle against Nazism in order to promote the cause of freedom. No doubt Churchill's American heritage and his credibility as a fighting man made his case plausible and compelling. He established a close friendship with President Roosevelt. On one occasion, when he was a guest at the White House, he was inadvertently interrupted by the president as he was getting out of his bath. As Roosevelt hastily reversed in his wheelchair, a naked Churchill assured him, "The Prime Minister has nothing to hide from the President of the United States." Churchill benefited from the technology introduced by Bell telephones and codenamed Sig Sally, which allowed him to communicate directly with President Roosevelt using encrypted radio signals. Visitors to the Churchill War Rooms can see the ingeniously concealed transatlantic telephone room behind the locked toilet door permanently engaged. It was assumed for use by the PM alone. The War Rooms are a wonderfully authentic location in basement rooms only 10 feet below the ground, where the entire military and civilian hierarchy sheltered from the Blitz and planned the future conduct of the war. The key rooms preserved after the surrender of Japan in August 1945 include the map room with its beauty chorus of differently colored telephones, each communicating with another service war room, government ministry, or equipped with a scrambler device. The walls adorned with maps covering the different theaters of war, and the cabinet room in which Churchill sat in the wooden chair, whose arms are now deeply scored by the marks driven into them by his fingers in moments of high tension. The speech you just heard, meanwhile, was broadcast by Churchill from the desk in his own study bedroom. In 2005, the Churchill Museum was created and displays a vast collection of memorabilia illustrating every aspect of Churchill's life. Here you can see an example of one of the Siren Suits, which made him instantly recognizable. Like an actor, Churchill understood the value of a distinctive costume. On more formal occasions, he favored the Homburg hat and spotty bow tie, but the Siren Suit gave the impression he was dressed for manual labor, busy rebuilding the country. During the war, for a comfortable mode of attire, they were made of light gabardine, but Churchill also had a version in velvet intended for evenings at home. Similarly, Churchill enjoyed giving the impression of being a bon vivant, regularly drinking champagne with meals. His favorite brand was Paul Roger, but the extent to which Churchill drank has been hotly debated. He once boasted to Clemmy that "I have taken more out of alcohol than alcohol has taken out of me." He was invariably seen clutching a glass of whiskey or Hein cognac, but as John Seck, his private secretary, recalled, "I never saw him the worse for drink. The glass of weak whiskey, like the cigars, was more a symbol than anything else, and one glass lasted for hours." When his friend Field Marshal Montgomery exclaimed, "I neither drink nor smoke, and am 100% fit," Churchill rejoined with some justification, "Well, I drink and I smoke, and I'm 200% fit." The Churchill Museum also attempts to explain how it was possible that a colossus like Churchill, a key player with Roosevelt and Stalin on the world stage, the hero of the hour, should be ejected from office so soon after the jubilant events of VA Day. His family attempted to console Churchill after the landslide victory of July 1945. Maybe it was a blessing in disguise. "At the moment," replied Churchill, "he seems quite effectively disguised." It did, however, enable Churchill to spend more time at Chartwell, the ponderous Victorian red brick mansion he purchased in 1922 for its sweeping views over the Weald of Kent. For 40 years, Churchill was most at home here, even building the kitchen garden wall, laying 90 bricks an hour, for which he earned an adult apprenticeship in the Amalgamated Union of Building Trade Workers. It was here he indulged, too, his passion for animals, which at one time included 5 foolish geese, 5 furious black swans, 2 muddy sheldrakes, 2 white swans, 2 Canadian geese, and some miscellaneous ducks. He loved feeding the golden orf in the pond, but when he declared his fondness for goldfish to Stalin, the Russian leader inquired whether he wanted any for lunch. The resemblance of Churchill to the British bulldog has been much commented on, but there was one animal that Churchill esteemed above all others. "Dogs look up to men, cats look down on them, but pigs treat us as equals." It was at Chartwell that Churchill produced his prodigious volume of literary work. It's been calculated that in his lifetime Churchill wrote over 20 million words and 10,000 speeches. Many of the latter were meticulously prepared in his study, where he liked to work standing up. Each was typed on octavo sheets held together with green treasury tags laid out with pauses and breath marks indicated and specific phrases on separate lines. His literary accomplishments included a novel, Savrola. I have consistently urged my friends to abstain from reading it. But it was for his masterly histories of the Second World War and of the English-speaking peoples that Churchill was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature and Oratory in 1953. Following his election defeat, Churchill devoted more time to his other pursuits, and late in life discovered a talent for owning winning racehorses. In his colours, Colonist 2 won £13,000 in prize money. He became friendly with movie stars like Vivian Leigh and Laurence Olivier, whom he saw portraying Lady Hamilton and Lord Nelson no less than 17 times. He enjoyed foreign travel, particularly to France, and spending time with wealthy friends like Aristotle Onassis on his yacht. As a speaker, he was greatly in demand and delivered one of his most famous speeches in Fulton, Missouri in 1946, warning of the threat posed by Soviet Russia and the Iron Curtain that had descended across Europe. Nevertheless, it was in Parliament that Churchill's contribution was most keenly felt. He became Prime Minister a second time in 1951, but by then his iron constitution was beginning to desert him. He was showered with honours, including the freedom of the city of Westminster, the Crystal Cross of Lorraine, 2 silver gilt cups from King George VI and Queen Elizabeth, and he received honorary citizenship of the United States, as well as membership of the Hastings Winkle Club. Always fond of dressing up, Churchill could choose between the robes of Chancellor of Bristol University, Lord Warden of the Cinque Ports, and the full-dress uniform of an elder brother of Trinity House, though he was equally content pottering about Chartwell in his 10-gallon hat adorned with goose feathers. Having turned down the new Queen's offer of a dukedom, that of London, which would have been a unique title for a unique figure in national history, Churchill accepted instead the Most Noble Order of the Garter from Queen Elizabeth II and became known thereafter as Sir Winston Churchill. One tribute, however, he did not appreciate was the specially commissioned portrait by Graham Sutherland, presented on his 80th birthday, the gift of both Houses of Parliament. Churchill damned the painting with faint praise, calling it a remarkable example of modern art, combining force and candour. He loathed it. It was later revealed to have been destroyed at Chartwell on the orders of Lady Churchill. On the same anniversary, an awestruck young man was sent to take the great man's photograph and breathlessly exclaimed, "Sir Winston, it's wonderful to take your photograph on your 80th birthday, and I do look forward to doing it again on your 100th. Sir Winston replied kindly, "Young man, you appear to be in good health and sound in wind and limb, so I see no reason why you should not." He remained an MP until 6 months before his death, contemplating its approach with equanimity. I am ready to meet my maker. Whether my maker is ready for the ordeal of meeting me is another matter. Sir Winston Churchill died at his final home, 28 Hyde Park Gate, on 24th January 1965, by coincidence, on the exact same date that his father Randolph had died 70 years earlier. His body lay in state in Westminster Hall, where 321,000 people filed past to pay their respects. His funeral was conducted at St. Paul's Cathedral, which he had done so much to preserve from destruction in the Blitz, and was the only state funeral accorded to a commoner in the 20th century, taking place in the presence of 6 monarchs and 15 heads of state. As his cortege took to the river, the Thameside cranes bowed their heads in solemn homage. Churchill himself had planned every detail of Operation Hope Not, as it was codenamed, which culminated in all the illustrious attendees embarking by train on the final leg to Oxfordshire. It must have given Churchill a little satisfaction to think of his old sparring partner, President de Gaulle of France, whom he'd once described as looking like a female llama who's just been surprised in her bath, taking the train from Waterloo. The interment took place at St. Martin's Church, Blaydon, where arguably the greatest Briton in history lies at rest, a mere mile from the place where his remarkable story began 90 years earlier.
Tim, thank you so much. That was an amazing trip through Churchill's life. We learned so much there, so much information. People are incredibly impressed by your portrayal of Churchill as well. Victoria says here, Churchill himself could be in the room. And Steve points out that you've actually played him in some films. What was that like to actually portray Winston Churchill in film?
Well, it was a huge honor and an awesome responsibility. I have to say the movie was actually about de Gaulle, because this year sees the anniversary of his celebrated clarion call to Frenchmen to continue the struggle. So the challenge here was to make Churchill a cameo rather than overwhelming the subject. But no, it was great fun.
And where would you recommend, if people are coming to London, they want to know a little bit more about Churchill, they want to visit a site associated with him, what is the site that you would recommend above all others? Well,
sure. Churchill is a very visible presence. His statue, as we've seen, dominates Parliament Square. But if you have limited time, then I'd recommend a visit to the Churchill War Rooms, the absolutely authentic location of Churchill's headquarters during the Blitz, and the rooms which have been marvelously preserved. But also, it's where the Churchill Museum really tells the story using some very exciting cutting-edge technology.
Definitely worth visiting. You can spend hours lost down there. Hopefully it will be reopened soon, and we can all come and visit. Lots of very appreciative comments, so thank you so much for your talk today. If you want to know more about Tim, then the best thing to do is to go to the Guide London website. There you can search for Tim Hudson, just type the name in, and that will give you a little resume of Tim's work. You can search for any of our guides, and you can look up tours and things as well. For instance, Westminster Abbey, National Gallery, Windsor Castle, all of our tours are listed on the Guide London website, guidelondon.org.uk. So thank you for watching today. Do share this recording with your friends and family. We want as many people as possible to see. Do catch up with ones you've missed. You can find them all on our YouTube channel. Just search for Guide London. I recommend the one about VE Day. That's a special hour-long special that tells you all about the events leading up to VE Day, a very important day in this country's history. We'll be back on Friday. Now, Friday, we're going to look at some of the green spaces in London. Not only the great big parks that you know so well, Hyde Park, Regent's Park. We're going to look at some of the smaller green spaces that you can be found within the boundaries of London. Very worthwhile exploring when you're in the city. So thank you for joining us for today. From me and from Tim, we'll say goodbye and join us again soon. Thank you.